Welcome to A Growing Concern. We talk a lot about this program, and you hear a lot about on the corporate news that this country is going down the tubes, and there's a relatively handful of reasons why people say that is. A lot of people I know say it's capitalism. A lot of people say it's corporations. In my opinion, it's profit. And the resource extraction or the arms manufacturers, a lot of the reasons why this country is the way it is because of profit. And those profits being put into our legislature, buying the congressman, that accounts for a large amount of that. And some people might think it accounts for a lot of it. And the fellow that's going to be on the show tonight, Dan Meek's been on before. He has a lot to say about this, and there's Oregon, and you're going to get a chance to decide whether maybe we can do something about this come November, because there's going to be some ballots or some initiatives on the ballot. And so we're going to get right into it with Dan Meek. Welcome to the program, Dan.
Thanks, Jim.
It was a real run-up getting on the air here. We get a little higher tech than usual.
Problem,
and but it's working out. And I don't know where you want to go to first. I know you want to weave your way through some slides here before you get to the gist of the actual initiative. But
sure.
You gathered how many signatures, and was it difficult to get the signatures?
Well, the measure we'll be talking about is a measure that will be on the ballot in Multnomah County in November. And the number of signatures we collected was actually 0. It was placed on the ballot through a mechanism called the Multnomah County Charter Review Committee.
Oh, I did not know that.
And the Multnomah County Charter, several decades ago, was amended to create every 6 years there is a thing called the Multnomah County Charter Review Committee, created of 15 people. And there's a very complicated way of appointing these folks. They're appointed by the county commissioners with approval of state legislators whose districts are in Multnomah County. It's very complicated, and there's various formulas, so you can't have too many representatives from one
they got their algorithms
political party, and so there was, this time, there was interest expressed by members of the Oregon Progressive Party and the Oregon Working Families Party, and they were able to put some folks on that committee, and as a result, the committee is referring to voters in the November ballot a campaign finance reform measure for Multnomah County. We'll get into that a little bit later, but basically it limits contributions to candidates in Multnomah County elections to $500 per person, and it bans contributions by corporations. And it allows the creation of small donor committees, which can only receive contributions from individuals and only in amounts of $100 or less, and can accumulate those funds and make contributions in those races. But we'll get into the details in a few minutes.
I was curious if it's $500 per person per year or per election cycle.
It's per election cycle, and generally, for Multnomah County offices, they're all, I think, 4-year offices. So that would be over, the 4-year period. Of course, most candidates don't crank up their campaign finance operations until the year of the election in any event, or maybe the year before. But what I would like to start on the slides here, and I hope that our your technology can read these.
Hopefully it caught up with us here, yeah.
And the first one indicates the results of a national study of anti-corruption grades. And this was by the State Integrity Investigation, which was a function of the Center for Public Integrity, an organization called Global Integrity and Public Radio International. And the monitor doesn't indicate that that's being shown.
Well, I'm sure they're working on it in there.
In any event, what the slide shows is that,
there we
go. It shows that the grades that Oregon received in this study last year weren't too good. In fact,
well, you got to say they're consistent.
Well, pretty consistent. Oregon got an F on public access to information, an F on political financing, an F on executive accountability, an F on procurement, regulation, an F on lobbying disclosure, an F when it comes to ethics enforcement agencies, but it did come in with a D- when it came to legislative accountability. And of these, within each of these categories, the study ranked the states, 1 through 50. And on political financing, Oregon came in 49th. It did barely beat out Mississippi, So as the worst state in America that is having the worst campaign finance regulatory system in the United States. And that's quite an achievement when you think about it.
Well, these bad grades, that's obviously in 2015, but it probably was the same the year before that and the year before that, which means that it isn't, the Democrats are in charge now, so it's not a partisan situation.
Oh, well, it actually got worse. Oregon's overall grades went down in 2015 compared to the previous study, which was done in 2012.
That's kind of what I was getting at, yeah.
Oregon's grades went down. I think they went down because the folks who were doing the study learned more about Oregon as time went on.
Oh, okay.
And this study is interesting because it took an approach that's quite different than the other studies that you may see in the press about, comparing states on corruption and which state is the most corrupt and which state is the least corrupt. Some of those studies come out finding that, New Jersey is very corrupt.
I would think that.
And, Oregon is very non-corrupt. But if you look at those studies, how they all have basically the same methodology. And that is they look at the number of convictions of public officials in each state or other people for corruption-type offenses. Bribery, whatever, campaign finance violations, etc. And they say the state with the most convictions is the most corrupt. Well, to me, that's totally backwards. The state with the least convictions is
the most corrupt.
Is the state that's allowing corruption to occur.
Good point.
For example, Tom DeLay, you may recall, he was indicted and convicted, but I think it was eventually overturned, but of diverting $180,000 of campaign money from corporations into legislative races in Texas. And so he was indicted, and we got the old Tom DeLay mugshot and all.
Yep.
In Oregon, that's perfectly legal. And in fact, Tom DeLay would be considered a very small player in Oregon when it comes to bundling only $180,000 in corporate contributions for the legislature. Our legislative races now cost $25 million in every election in Oregon. It's the highest
for all the races.
For all of it.
Yeah.
And it's the highest per capita amount spent on campaigns for the legislature of any state except New Jersey. New Jersey politicians have to spend more, particularly in northern New Jersey, because they are in the New York City media market. They have to buy TV ads in New York City. In southern New Jersey, they're in the Philadelphia media market. They have to buy TV ads in Philadelphia. So those cost a lot more. But Oregon is basically the most, spends more, political candidates spend more per capita in Oregon than any state other than New Jersey. So,
and we're only like the 25th in population, too, something like that.
Right. So the other day, I noticed that the United States Supreme Court came out with a decision that overturned the bribery conviction of the former Governor McDonnell of Virginia. He was the governor who succeeded Tim Kaine, who's now the vice presidential nominee of the Democratic Party. And of course, Tim Kaine himself was accused and was found to have taken $160,000 in gifts from lobbyists and corporations while he was governor of Virginia. In any event, Tim Kaine and his wife took several $100,000 worth of gifts, and the federal government prosecuted them under the federal bribery statute.
It's McDonald.
McDonnell.
Yeah.
And he was convicted and sentenced to a few years in jail, but he appealed his conviction, and it finally went into the United States Supreme Court, which a couple of weeks ago overturned all of his convictions under the federal bribery statute. They said that under the federal bribery statute, it's the public official is not guilty of bribery unless he agrees in taking money or other benefits. He agrees to take an official act in exchange for that. And McDonnell was not accused of doing official acts like vetoing a bill or signing a bill or issuing a contract or adopting rules or official government acts. He was accused of helping this guy who was the owner of a vitamin supplement company. He's the one who provided the money and benefits and trips and furs or whatever. He provided benefits to that person by introducing him to the state health authority, so he could argue that this should be part of the state health plan.
So he gave the guy access.
Gave the guy access, and the Supreme Court says, well, that's not what the federal bribery statute outlaws. So I looked up the Oregon bribery statute, and here it is. There's the crime of bribe giving. If a person the person commits the crime of bribe giving if the person offers, confers, or agrees to confer any pecuniary benefit on a public servant with intent to influence the public servant's vote, opinion, judgment, action, decision, or exercise of discretion in an official capacity. So that seems broader than the federal statute because it says with an intent to influence the public servant's opinion. Well, having an opinion is not an official act, so that seems more broad. And then there's also the statute of bribe receiving. The public servant commits the crime of bribe receiving, solicits pecuniary benefit, or skip down to B, accepts or agrees to accept any pecuniary benefit upon an agreement or understanding that the vote, opinion, judgment, action, decision, or exercise of discretion as a public servant will thereby influence. So that looked like, looked pretty good. Looked like a pretty good bribery statute, kind of the same as in the other 49 states. But then I looked a little further and I found the definitions to be used in the bribery statute. And remember, in the bribe here only happens if the public servant solicits or receives a pecuniary benefit from the person who's providing the bribe, right? Pecuniary benefit. Well, what does that mean? Here's a definition. It means a gain or advantage to the beneficiary or to a third person pursuant to the desire or consent of the beneficiary in the form of money, property, commercial interest, or economic gain, but does not include a political campaign contribution reported in accordance with ORS Chapter 260. So that means anybody can go to a public official and say, look, I will give you a campaign contribution in direct exchange for your vote on a bill or for getting a government contract or for getting you to adopt these rules. It exempts all campaign contributions from bribery. And I looked up, and in many states, there are convictions of people for bribery using campaign contributions. In Oregon, however, if you make it a campaign contribution, it's not a bribe by definition. So, in addition, it says it has to be reported in accordance with ORS Chapter 260. That's the ORSTAR system for reporting campaign contributions. But the Oregon Supreme Court, in a case about 20 years ago, said that the person making this campaign contribution, it's still not a bribe, even if the campaign contribution is never reported.
So you can just claim that it was.
So there you go. Oregon's bribery statute has this gigantic loophole in it.
How long ago were these written?
These statutes, I don't know. I don't know when they were last amended, but it's got a giant loophole. And I looked up the bribery statutes of other states. I found no other state that has this loophole. No other state says that a politician or public official can take, of course in Oregon, unlimited campaign contributions and literally agree to do something because he receives the campaign contributions. What would be considered a direct criminal felony bribe, punishable by 10 years in prison or more, hundreds of thousands of dollars of fine in other states, is perfectly legal in Oregon. Mm-hmm. So,
I can't think of anything more blatant.
It is amazing. So what I would like to do, I'm showing here the contact information for the group that is promoting this ballot measure in Multnomah County for November. And I hope that this will be shown a few times so that folks will be able to contact them. Of course, you can always Google Fair Elections Oregon or Fair Elections Multnomah and find this information as well. Just a little bit more, little background in Oregon, provide a little context.
How bad do we need this? Basically?
Yeah, political spending in Oregon has been skyrocketing for over the last 20 years. This shows how much money has been spent on legislative races. It was up to, in the last session, $29 million on legislative races. That's 10 times more than it was back in 1996. The governor races have shown a similar trajectory. Back in '98, it was about 2 million, and in the last governor's election, it was about 20 million. Now, I'm sorry about that little legend in the lower right-hand corner. Could not reconnect all network drives. We couldn't get rid of that legend. And so, a warning to folks out there: don't upgrade to Windows 10.
And call up Bill Gates and complain.
I upgraded to Windows 10 and I can't get rid of that thing.
He's the richest man on the planet.
That's right.
And he can't fix his software.
He can't get rid of that logo. Races in Oregon are getting ridiculously expensive. The average spending in Oregon, most legislative races, very little is spent on because they're not competitive in the general election.
You mean the incumbent basically has it whipped?
Well, the person who is the candidate of the major party with predominant voter registration is the one who's got it whipped. In Portland, the Republicans have no chance of winning, and the Democrats have no chance of losing. So nobody spends much money.
Ah, okay.
In Eastern Oregon, it's the opposite. Nobody spends money because the Republicans win. There are only a very few competitive districts in Oregon. There's 60 House districts. I'd say maybe 12 are competitive. The ones in the Portland suburbs, the Eugene suburbs, and City of Bend, and maybe around Ashland. Everywhere else is just not competitive. So all the money is spent. The big money is spent in the competitive races. And in 2014, the top 10 Senate candidates spent an average of $750,000 each just for a Senate district, and the top 10 House candidates spent $684,000. That's to get as few as you can win a House district with as few as 9,000 votes. And so you're looking at something on the order of $70 a vote in order to win a legislative race.
That's why some people are calling it an auction, not an election.
The legislative folks in 2014 spent these amounts. You'll notice that some individual candidates spent over $1 million in their legislative races, and some of these were just for House seats.
Right, and when you say spend it, that means that was donated to them for some.
Right, they received campaign contributions, and basically in the same amount that they spent, and these are all in excess of 700 in this particular chart, so excess of $750,000. It was a little bit less than 2012. But still, you had a $1 million Senate candidate in 2012 as well, but the amounts are going up. Now, the ballot measure that we're talking about is local, so let's look at the trajectory of spending in local races. Here's the recent, this is this year, except for the Multnomah County chair races down there at the bottom. These are amounts raised and spent in this year's primary election only. Ted Wheeler, of course, won the mayorship in the primary election.
Won it big time, yeah.
Right. Steve Novick is getting up there around 400,000. That's just for the primary. He now has a general election. I'm sure he's out there raising more money for the general election as well. And you can see that in the Multnomah County chair race in 2014, that also broke all records for spending in that race. Deborah Kafori, 466, Jim Francisconi, 330,000 for that race. So
this Amanda Schroeder, wasn't her husband in that position before this?
No, you're thinking of Martha Schrader.
Schrader, yeah.
And that's that's.
But how come such a little amount of money? I mean,
well, she lost.
Okay.
She lost to Lori Stegman, apparently.
Yeah, apparently.
I can't say that for sure. If you look at the identity of people who are giving money locally, this is a list of the contributors, the largest contributors to Charlie Hales' race for mayor in 2012, and you can see that the big contributors of $10,000 to $25,000 each are rail contractors, steel manufacturers, more rail car manufacturers, rail builders, bridge builders, and a whole bunch of real estate developers. And so those are the folks who fund the campaigns, the big money campaigns.
Well, if there was
city offices.
If there's any doubt why Portland's going down the toilet, that's a good example right there of what's going on. If those folks are the ones that are buying the ear of the mayor.
Now this is an interesting chart. I hope it's visible. This shows in Seattle the average contribution in the mayor race back in 2013. In Washington, all races have a maximum contribution per individual or per corporation of $600. In Oregon, no limits. And so that's why you can get all those massive $10,000, $20,000 contributions. And in statewide races, it's not unusual for individuals to contribute $300,000 in a statewide race. Typically, the Rod Wendt, the Wendt family of Geld Wind usually makes those huge contributions on that order.
Kind of the local Koch brothers.
But look at Seattle. The average contribution in the Seattle mayor's race, the last Seattle mayor's race, were those amounts. The winner was Mr. Murray there with an average contribution of $247, about 2/3 of the way down. Second place was Mike McGinn, average contribution $206. Contrast that with the kind of contributions you get in Oregon races, multi-tens of thousands of dollars, would all be illegal in Seattle. And Mayor Hales funded his campaign. 53% of the money for his campaign came in contributions of $1,000 or more. So it's quite different in Seattle and every city in Washington where small contributions are where it comes from. This is an indication of where Ted Wheeler's contributions came from this year. Unions, investors, timber CEOs, his mother.
His mother, yeah.
More timber CEOs, Columbia Sportswear, etc. And here are some other smaller ones. A car registration software company, hotel corporations, electrical contractors, another timber company, more unions, vintners, financial CEOs, etc.
Is there any legal reason why so many of it's 10,000?
No, that just seems to be a popular amount to give. Steve Novick's contributions in the primary, somewhat smaller. He sort of maxed out at 5,000 from real estate unions, rail car makers, Schnitzer Steel, property developers, etc. So Steve Novick also takes very large contributions that would be illegal in Washington.
What's this rail car maker? You have any idea why there's so much of that?
Well, sure. The city is involved in the streetcar, Portland streetcar.
Right, makes sense.
I mean, the city isn't directly involved in light rail because that's TriMet, but they're involved in the streetcar, and so they get lots of money from rail car makers. So the amendment the amendment to the county charter, and will be on the ballot this November, does the following. It prohibits all contributions by corporations and other entities in Multnomah County races, and that's for the Multnomah County commissioners, and for the sheriff and for the district attorney. Those are the races. It limits any candidate to receiving $500 from any individual or any political committee. And that's over basically the 4-year period. This is very similar to what has been now adopted in Seattle. Seattle last year passed a ballot measure that lowered the limit. It used to be just the statewide limit actually the statewide limit has gone up to $700 per person. They lowered that to $500 for races in Seattle. And for city council races, they divide up their city council by district. And so for those district races, Seattle reduced it to $250 per individual. So this allows $500, so it's really twice as much as Seattle allows. It allows the creation of small donor committees, which are forbidden from accepting any contributions from corporations or unions or anyone except individuals in amounts of $100 or less. And so those small donor committees can then spend that money any way they want. They can donate it all to a candidate, they can take out their own ads, whatever, as long as it comes in small amounts from individuals. And the amendment also requires that the 5 largest true sources of true original sources of funds, as long as each true original source contributed or spent $500 or more, be prominently disclosed on political advertisements. So if, for example, if you look back at the amounts that we were talking about there from Ted Wheeler this year, he would have to disclose that his largest contributions came from the Oregon Education Association, SEIU Local 503, investor William Swindells, timber CEO Peter Stott, and venture capitalist Peter Bricks. That would have to be in every ad for him. It would have to be in the brochures he sends out. It would have to be on billboards. It would have to be on TV and radio ads as well. Mm-hmm. And this can be a very effective thing. It's 8 states now have somewhat similar requirements. California has had the requirement for some time, and it had a large effect in recent election in 2014 in the city of Richmond, California. City of Richmond is in the Bay Area. It's north of Berkeley.
Yeah,
and
it's East County.
in East County.
Yeah.
It's highly industrialized, lots of refineries.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, lots of refineries.
It's by Oakland, isn't it? Yeah.
It's north of Oakland,
Yeah.
right? It's on the bay, and so it's got ports and et cetera, and lots of refineries. So the largest refinery there is Chevron. And so Chevron was having some problems making toxic gas releases and explosions and whatever. And so
Typical stuff.
The city council of Richmond, which is a city of 120,000 people, about the size of Salem,
Oh, I thought it was bigger than that.
smaller than Eugene, they started saying, well, you know, maybe Chevron, when this kind of thing happens and you make toxic gas releases, maybe you ought to give us a warning, so we can, you know, maybe do something about it, arrange an evacuation, something.
Mm-hmm.
And Chevron said, well, we'll think about that. And oh, by the way, we're now going to run our own candidates for city council. So they recruited candidates for all of the city council races and the mayorship in Richmond for 2014. And they spent $3 million promoting those candidates, which was 60 times more than the opponents, than the other candidates spent. And they took out billboards, and they sent out brochures, and they did, you know, TV and radio, and etc. But every ad had to say at some point, major funder, Chevron Inc., an energy company.
That was the end of that.
Gee whiz, Chevron is telling me I ought to vote for all these folks for city council and mayor. And even though they were outspent 60 to 1, all of the opponents overwhelmingly won, and all of the Chevron candidates overwhelmingly lost. So
it is effective.
it is effective when you know where the money is coming from. That tells you, that's a very good indication of the credibility of the message. And it tells you who wants this person in office. And if it's Chevron who wants this person in office, the people of Richmond said, we're going to vote for somebody else. Same thing might be true here, depending upon who is funding the campaign.
It's obvious it's pretty effective because there's such a fight not to be mandated to put that on the ads.
Right.
So,
and I would also point out that Oregon used to have a weaker version of disclosure. It simply said that, well, you've got to, every ad has to identify its source, you know, who put it on. But how that was interpreted was that you could satisfy that requirement just by saying the name of the committee that paid, the political committee that paid for it. So let's say here's an ad, you know, against someone running for office. You could say at the end, you know, or wherever on the ad, that this is, you know, paid for by by Oregonians for food and shelter.
you have no idea who that is.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Of course, the true original source of the money would have been Monsanto, Dow Chemical, DuPont Chemical, you know, other
Tyson Foods, maybe.
pesticides,
Yeah.
agribusiness and pesticides. That's Oregonians for food and shelter. So other states, 8 other states have adopted various forms of this now that require that the true original sources of the funds have to be disclosed. So in Richmond, for example, it had to be Chevron. It couldn't just be the Citizens for Good Stuff, you know, committee that would have been 100% funded by Chevron. It had to be the actual true original source. So,
You know, a little aside here. You're familiar with Paul Cienfuegos?
yeah, sure.
And this is right in, he was on last week, and this is just in harmony with what he's talking about. Local citizens taking it upon themselves to pass laws that block these corporations from doing what they're doing. And he was speaking of like oil trains and different things, but you know, this is the same thing he was talking about.
Well, the rest of my story, by the way, about Oregon used to have a law that had a weaker law about that, is that the Oregon Legislature, at the urging of Attorney General, what was his name? In 2001, Hardy Myers, repealed even that. So in Oregon, there's no Oregon law that requires any political ad to identify even its source at all. You can put up completely anonymous political ads in Oregon, and the ones that you see identified, like on TV and radio, those are required to be identified by the Federal Communications Commission, not by Oregon. But anything that's not controlled by the FCC in Oregon doesn't have to be identified at all. And that was a bill that was overwhelmingly passed by the legislature in 2001. I, of course, testified against it, and Governor Kitzhaber immediately signed it.
Mm-hmm.
So
you're
Oregon,
talking about the media, though. The pamphlet says who is backing the different opinions,
what
right?
pamphlet?
The voters' pamphlet.
No, are you kidding?
Well, I always see names of organizations, but I'm unclear on what it all was that I saw, but because it's been a while.
The candidate in his or her voters pamphlet statement can put in there anything they want. But if, for example, the candidate is backed by, $1 million from Chevron, they're probably not going to put, endorsed by Chevron in the voters pamphlet statement. It's totally up to the candidate what goes in there. There's no required. You're not required to disclose where any of your money comes from in the voters pamphlet. And just wanted to compare this for a minute, our Multnomah measure, with what Seattle did last year in Initiative 122. It limits campaign contributions to $500 for any individual or political or entity. It prohibits contributions by persons or entities with half of the $250,000 in city contracts over the past 2 years, or which has paid $5,000 or more to lobby city officials. That's a pretty good measure as well. And prohibits lobbying of the city by elected officials or high-level staff for 3 years after leaving office, is what that last word is. So the Seattle measure was somewhat broader than the one that the Charter Review Committee of Multnomah County has referred to voters. And once again, for folks who want to be, the other part of the Seattle measure that folks should know about is it also provided public funding of Seattle city elections. Every January of an election year, each voter will receive in the mail 4 $25 vouchers, which they can turn over to candidates in order to fund their campaign. But each candidate has to agree to the spending limits that you see there, which is far lower than the amounts that are spent in Oregon races for mayor or city council. And the vouchers are funded by a property tax levy. And the voters of Seattle passed that by by a vote of 63% to 37% in November.
Isn't that about what the voters in Portland turned down? The voters-owned elections was somewhere along that?
No. In 2010, there was a measure on the ballot. In about 2005, 2006, the City Council adopted a different kind of public funding system for Portland city races, and then included a sunset clause that said this has to go back to the voters in 2010.
Right, I remember that.
So it did go to the voters in 2010, and it lost by way less than 0.5%.
Oh, I didn't remember that correctly.
Yeah, it lost by a couple hundred votes.
That was terrible. That was terrible, because I think I liked this one here a little bit better. With it didn't take any money out of people's pocket. They had to put $5 out.
Yeah, and the one that the Portland adopted was pretty easily gamed.
And it was.
And because it required the candidate to go out and collect, in order to receive like a pot of $100,000, the candidate went out and collected, several hundred signatures of voters, and each one was supposed to contribute $5. But of course, there was no way to prove that they contributed $5 or not, because it could be done in cash, and so there was quite a bit of gaming of that system. This system isn't gameable. You just get a voucher and you get to spend it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an interesting system. And Amanda Fritz, Commissioner Fritz, who did use the public funding system when she was first elected to the City Council, is developing a proposal for public funding of Portland City elections, and so we'll see
on the
how
same procedures before, or more like this one?
Well, more like this. Well, it's actually
That's good news.
It's more like the New York City matching system. In New York City races, if a candidate goes out and gets, let's say, a contribution of $100 or less, it's matched like 3-to-1, 4-to-1, 5-to-1, something like that. So small contributions are matched by a city fund, and I think that's what she's going to be pursuing. But the Multnomah County measure has no public funding in it. It just limits on contributions and required disclosure of the source of funding in political ads, and there's no public funding in there at all. So once again, there's the contact info for people who want to get involved in this. multfairelection.org is the website, and I hope people will take a look at it and get involved. Another thing that we could talk about are the other measures, the statewide measures that will be on the Oregon ballot in November.
It's really anemic this year.
It is. I did a little chart here that shows the number of initiatives that qualified for the ballot in Oregon since 2000. And back in 2000, there were 18 citizen-initiated, initiatives on the statewide ballot.
Like 5 of them or 6 of them were from one person, though. Like the Republican Tom something or other.
3 or 4 might have been from Bill Sizemore.
Bill Sizemore, right?
But there were a large number of progressive initiatives as well. And as you can see, that's consistently gone down into the range in 2014 of only 4, and this year there's only going to be 2. So this really reflects the policies of the Democratic Party, both in the Legislature and the Secretary of State's office, in making the initiative process far more difficult to use than it used to be. They've adopted dozens of extremely ridiculous and picky rules, which enable them to throw out a large number of signatures. In Washington, for example, the average validity rate on a statewide measure is over 80%. In Oregon, it's less than 60%.
So you almost got to double your signatures then.
You've almost got to turn in twice as many signatures as required in order to have a chance of qualifying a ballot measure in Oregon. So measures,
that's a statewide.
That's a state. Well, it's really all of them, but the effect is most seen on the statewide level. So here are the only 2 measures, statewide measures, that will be on the ballot in Oregon this year. There's Measure 97, and this is what I put on this slide here is the actual caption of the ballot title. This is what voters will see on the ballot. Increases corporate minimum tax when sales exceed 25 million, funds education, healthcare, senior services. So is that really informative? What the measure does is it imposes a gross receipts tax on all corporations whose Oregon sales exceed $25 million a year, and it's expected to raise $5 billion per 2-year period. In Oregon, budgeting, the state budget is done on a 2-year basis called a biennium, and this would collect $5 billion per biennium. Basically, it's about a 35% overall increase in Oregon state revenue.
It's pretty huge.
It's big.
Add that to the hemp and the cannabis, and we just might get into the black, huh?
This is a lot bigger than the cannabis. This is in the billions, and I'm not. This is something maybe we could talk about, get into the details at a later time. Various studies have been done by Legislative Fiscal Office and Portland State University, indicating that this would function largely as a sales tax, and would probably be largely passed through to Oregon consumers. The one study said it would increase the prices to Oregon consumer on average about $600 a year. But there are various arguments to be made for it. One argument is that the share of Oregon revenue that's paid for by corporations has gone down dramatically over the past 30 years. It used to be about a third, and now it's about 15%. Basically, the corporate, or much less than that. But the corporate share of Oregon state revenues has gone down dramatically. This would bring it back up somewhat.
That's way over 50% reduction.
Yeah, this would bring it up somewhat and put Oregon more in the realm of the average state when it comes to how much of state funds come from taxes on corporations as opposed to taxes on individuals. Oregon has very high taxes on individuals, particularly on individuals at or near the poverty line. Oregon is in the top 5 of states in taxing families who live either at the poverty line or within 150% of the poverty line, because our Oregon income tax starts at such a low level that Oregon taxes, in income taxes, a lot of people that are not don't face any income tax in other states.
It's just a couple $100 or something they start taxing, isn't it?
It's around 1,000.
1,000 now? Because it used to
1,000
be
per
a lot
individual.
less.
But if you make even $1,000 as an individual in Oregon in income a year, you have to pay income taxes and file the forms and all that sort of thing. The other measure, but we can talk about these other measures. That
And we're
measure
down to like 18
later.
minutes here, so.
Other measure is what would be 98. And this is the ballot title caption: creates outdoor school education fund, continuously funded through lottery to provide outdoor school programs statewide. That sounds pretty nice.
Mm-hmm.
I think this will pass pretty easily. Unfortunately, what it doesn't really have any legal effect, because it's a statute that says that the legislature should appropriate so much for these purposes. Outdoor school
It
programs.
says should.
Should.
Yeah.
Or actually, it says they will. But it's not. But nothing that is done by statute, by initiative, is binding on the legislature. So this will be certainly an indication of public support for funding outdoor school programs, which I guess is camp. I don't know.
Like you said,
Outward Bound,
recess,
rock climbing, recess. I don't know. It's probably great, but the legislature can still do whatever it wants, because when the legislature passes an appropriation bill, that's a law. When the voters pass a statutory ballot measure, that's a law.